An American dies at the hands of ISIS, and the president urges Congress to authorize force against the terrorist group. Retired US Congressman Frank Wolf is just back from Iraq. He will share some alarming news. And later, Madison, Wisconsin Bishop Robert MORLINO will comment on Pope Francis's efforts to reform the Vatican and the upcoming Synod on the family. Finally, the new film 50 Shades of Grey is breaking box office records, but does it glamorize sexual abuse and endanger young women? Dr. MEG MEEKER and columnist MARYBETH HICKS will offer their thoughts. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Happy Mardi Gras, or as we in New Orleans call it, Lenten preparation. Congressman Frank Wolf, Bishop Robert MORLINO, MARYBETH HICKS, and Dr. MEG MEEKER are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question about that 50 Shades of Grey movie, drop me a tweet at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show, or you can email me at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. President Barack Obama announced Wednesday that he is asking Congress to formally authorize military force against Islamic State militants. Declaring that ISIS is on the defensive and going to lose, Obama said a large deployment of U.S. troops won't be necessary to fight the Islamic State. He specifically ruled out the deployment of ground troops. Under the War Powers proposal, the use of military force, presumably airstrikes and special op missions, would be authorized for 3 years, unbounded by national borders. He said this would allow lawmakers and his successor the needed flexibility to wage a battle which is likely to take some time. The president's proposal comes as U.S. intelligence reports that an estimated 20,000 foreign fighters have joined the Islamic State and other extremist groups in the region. On Capitol Hill, the proposal was met with skepticism from both sides of the aisle. Vague language was the general complaint. Too open-ended for some, too limiting for others. The president's proposal might not offer much consolation to the Christians in Iraq and Syria. Earlier this week, the bishops of the Chaldean Catholic Church issued a statement urging the international community to liberate the occupied territories of Iraq from the Islamic State. Meeting in Baghdad, bishops also urged Iraqi and international leaders to protect Christians and other Iraqis so that they could return to their homes and live in safety. Archbishop Bashir Warda from the Kurdistan region of Iraq was more specific. In an address to the UK Parliament on Monday, the bishop warned that airstrikes were not enough, and he begged for the West to deploy ground troops. He confessed, quote, "As a Catholic, I find it hard to say, but I want military action. There is no other way now. We don't have much time left as Christians in this region." End quote. Separately, during a visit to Rome, Archbishop Boutros Marayati of Syria said Christians in his land feel forgotten, neglected, and betrayed by the West. More on the plight of Christians, ISIS, and the president's proposal in our next segment. And in response to the growing threat of Boko Haram and what is escalating into a regional war, Niger this week has agreed to join Nigeria, Cameroon, Benin, and Chad in an 8,700-member regional force to fight the militants. The jihadi group, which has effective control over most of northeastern Nigeria, has begun launching attacks into Niger and Cameroon. Since the abduction of 270 Nigerian girls last spring, hundreds more have been kidnapped. Meanwhile, in addition to the regional African force, 19 more countries, including the US, the UK, and Canada, have committed 1,200 in personnel to help train the African forces. And according to multiple sources, Pope Francis was targeted in an assassination plot during his visit to the Philippines. The former Philippine National Police Chief told the Philippine Senate on Monday that al-Qaeda terrorists had planned to construct a bomb to be detonated as the papal convoy drove through Manila. The route of the papal motorcade was altered in light of that information. The police chief further testified that the terrorist, Zulkifli Binhir, was involved. The infamous bomb maker is believed responsible for the 2002 Bali nightclub attack that killed more than 200. Binhir was killed in a raid by Philippine National Police a week after the papal visit. At a press conference Tuesday, Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi dismissed the assassination plot as unfounded. He said he heard from Manila Cardinal Luis Tagle, who heard from his good sources, that the information is unreliable. Back here in the U.S., gay marriages have begun in Alabama, sort of, in spite of a U.S. Supreme Court ruling earlier this week allowing gay marriages to begin in the state. 44 of Alabama's 67 county probate judges are not issuing such licenses. This after the intervention of Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore. On Sunday, he told the probate judges to refrain from issuing or recognizing marriage licenses that are inconsistent with the state constitution, pending a ruling by the Supreme Court. Alabama defines marriage as between a man and a woman. Now, after the U.S. Supreme Court refused on Monday to stay a lower court federal decision, Moore intervened again. This time, he said the federal court order was not binding due to a legal technicality. Either way, 37 states now issue marriage licenses for same-sex couples, due largely to court rulings. Also of note, Italy's High Court this week ruled that same-sex marriage was not a constitutional right in that country. Meanwhile, will Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg need to recuse herself from the High Court's upcoming gay marriage case for prejudging it? When asked in a Bloomberg News interview about the possible ruling that could make gay marriage a constitutional right, she said she thought it would not take a large adjustment for Americans to accept such a ruling. She then said this:
"The change in people's attitudes on that issue has been enormous. In recent years, people have said, this is the way I am. I think that as more and more people came out and said, this is who I am, and the rest of us recognized that they are one of us."
Federal law states any judge, justice, or magistrate judge of the United States shall disqualify himself in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. We shall continue to watch this story. And a federal appeals court has reversed lower court victories by 2 western Pennsylvania dioceses and a Christian college over the HHS contraceptive mandate. The 3-0 ruling Wednesday by the Third Circuit Court of Appeals said the Obamacare mandate places no substantial burden on the religious groups, and therefore no right to religious expression was violated. Pittsburgh Bishop David Zubik rued the decision, saying, "The church is no longer free to practice what we preach. An appeal to the Third Circuit or the U.S. Supreme Court is being considered." Back in the U.S., 3 Muslim students were shot and killed on Tuesday near the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Police said the initial investigation suggests the incident stemmed from a parking dispute between the suspect, 46-year-old Craig Stephen Hicks, and the 3 victims. Relatives of the deceased say the murders should be viewed as hate crimes, since the victims were killed execution style. Police have promised to continue their investigation to see if religion was a factor. Mr. Hicks, the suspected killer, was a self-proclaimed left-leaning atheist who posted numerous rants on his Facebook page. He had previous altercations with the victims and other residents. Curial reform is taking center stage this week as the church's cardinals gather in Rome. On Thursday, Pope Francis opened a 2-day consistory laying out the goals of reform and urging cooperation. Reforming the Vatican bureaucracy has been more or less a mandate for the Holy Father since taking office. The Pope said the aim of the reforms is to encourage greater harmony, collaboration, and total transparency to help the Church spread the faith and reach out to others. Reform will also likely include the consolidation of several pontifical councils and dicasteries into 2 wide-reaching congregations. Now, under the proposals, one congregation would be responsible for the laity and family life. The other would focus on the Church's works of charity, justice, and peace. More on all of this when Bishop Robert MORLINO sits with us. When we return, former Congressman and human rights activist Frank Wolf is here to talk about what he saw during his trip to Iraq and the new group he's founded to help Christians in the region. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. News of the murder of American aid worker Kayla Mueller at the hands of ISIS has renewed calls for greater U.S. military commitment in the region. ISIS subjugation of Christians and religious minorities in Iraq continues as well. Now, my next guests recently returned from a fact-finding mission in Iraq. What they discovered is disturbing, but it has led them to found a new human rights group, the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. Joining me on set is former Virginia Congressman Frank Wolf and the president of the Wilberforce Initiative, RANDEL EVERETT. Thank you both for being here. Congressman Wolf, I want to start with you. 10 years ago, there were more than 1 million Christians just in Iraq. Now we're under 300,000, and that's probably too high a number. You spoke to many of these people who are on the run from the place where they had sought safe harbor when ISIS swept in. What are they telling you? What did you see?
Well, the stories are horrendous. ISIS has moved them out. It is genocide. What is taking place to the Christian community and the Yazidis is genocide, and they never complain. The one thing they did ask, where is the West? Does the West care? They've been very concerned. Pope Francis has spoken out, a handful of others have, but very few prominent religious leaders in the West have spoken out. So they kind of wondered, does the West really care? More biblical activity took place in Iraq than any other country of the world other than Israel. Daniel's buried there. Ezekiel's buried there. Jonah's tomb was just blown up. So they're wondering, have they been abandoned? But it is genocide what is taking place to the Christians and the Yazidis.
Randel, what did you see? I know you all visited with Dominican Order of Nuns. You visited several churches. One in Mosul, an 800-year-old church, is being used essentially as a torture chamber, you reported.
We interviewed probably more than 75 of the ones who had been displaced. They were in these IDP placement centers throughout Erbil and all the way over to Dahuk. We interviewed Christians and also the Yazidis. The Dominican sisters were some of our heroes there. They were unbelievable. The very second day that they were in exile, and they'd just been run from their places, it took them 10 hours to go what would have been a 40-minute trip. It was in August, 120 degrees in the daytime. So they get to Erbil and they're just living on the street, just thousands, probably 40,000 just from Mosul itself. And obviously some of them were infants, some of them were elderly. And some of the doctors and the pharmacists and the nurses and all who themselves were displaced began to minister to and treat the people who were ill on the sidewalk. And we were there 5 months into this, and one of the churches had set up a clinic, and they had these containers, and 4 volunteer doctors were working, the pharmacists were working, but this one lady, Sister Diana, was kind of orchestrating it all, and just caring for their own people, treating them with as much dignity and respect and compassion as they possibly could under those circumstances.
Frank, Congressman Wolf, you encountered a couple. The wife had been diagnosed with cancer.
Right.
And they told you their story. What happened?
They were in a small village. ISIS came in, took over the village. They then drove to Mosul for treatment for his wife. His wife had breast cancer. At the hospital, ISIS said unless they convert, and unless the wife converts, they would not give her treatment. The wife refused to convert. The husband refused, and of course the wife died. He has one son who lives in San Diego. He has a daughter living outside in Turkey, and he has 2 young kids. But he would not convert. He would not deny Jesus. He would not convert. That's the type of people. These people are good people. They're good people, and they're waiting for the West to speak out and do something, and they have not seen that.
You say in this report that we are looking at a genocide of this Christian community unless the West steps in and ISIS is utterly defeated. What should be done? What do you recommend?
Well, there's so many things that can be done. One, we have to do whatever it takes to defeat ISIS, because ISIS is coming here. ISIS is coming to Europe. There are 140 Americans that have left this country and gone to fight with ISIS. There are 3,000 to 4,000 people from Europe that have gone there. ISIS has the most sophisticated military. They have all the equipment that Americans had that they gave to the Iraqi military. The best tanks, the best guns, the best Humvees. So unless you do whatever it takes to defeat ISIS, ISIS is now spreading into Afghanistan. ISIS is connected to what's taking place in Yemen. ISIS is connected to the Boko Haram, which is capture all those young Christian girls. So whatever it takes ought to be done to defeat ISIS. Otherwise, they're coming here.
I want to play this for you. This is President Obama today urging Congress to authorize the use of force against ISIS. Listen.
The resolution we've submitted today does not call for the deployment of U.S. ground combat forces to Iraq or Syria. That's not in our national security interest, and it's not necessary for us to defeat ISIL. This resolution repeals the 2002 authorization of force for the invasion of Iraq and limits this new authorization to 3 years. I do not believe America's interests are served by endless war.
I do not believe America's interest is served by endless war. How does this authorization work? What is he talking about? If no troops are on the ground and you're limiting it to 3 years,
you can't win. It basically, you would need a lawyer to comply with what they're sending up. Before the action will be taken, you have to check with the lawyer. Whatever it takes to defeat ISIS should be done. They beheaded Americans. We saw what they did to the Jordanian pilot. We saw what they did to the young lady from Arizona. They were involved in many other activities. They need to be defeated. And if they are not defeated, the genocide will continue. There'll be no Christians. There'll be no Yazidis. And they're coming to the West. Yeah. They're coming to the West.
Tell me about this Nineveh Protection Unit. You met with them. Who are these people? This is really a little Christian remnant remaining in the Nineveh plain.
They're basically Christian men who are coming together. Some are old, some are young, some are out of shape, but they care deeply. They basically want to protect their own villages. They want the Kurdish government to give them the Nineveh Plains Christian protector, whereby Christians and Yazidis and Turkmen can come and live. So that basically is a National Guard unit. And Senator Levin had language in the defense bill that allows that, and they're not getting aid. We're not giving aid to the Peshmerga that are fighting ISIS.
You met with them. Why not? Why aren't we giving them aid?
Well, I guess that's a question that the president would have to answer. I don't understand. ISIS has sophisticated weapons. Peshmerga does not. They're looking for weapons. They're looking for training so they can stop what is going on. I don't know why we're not giving it to them.
The Daily Beast is reporting that in the case of Kayla Mueller, as well as James Foley, Stephen Sutloff, they were all being held. And apparently, British intelligence identified the location. It took the United States a full month to send and authorize a rescue mission. They are claiming, this report at least, and others, that the administration was too slow to act and therefore we lost these Americans. Your thoughts?
I'd have to see the report. I would hope that's not true, because
it would be awful if it were.
It would be awful.
Terrible. Let's talk about who's financing ISIS. You were on the ground. You talked to many people. What are they telling you?
Well, they were saying, and Randall might want to chime in here, but they were saying that money is coming from Saudi Arabia, from elements in Saudi Arabia, also from Qatar, and the Turkey government is allowing people, they fly to Istanbul, they go south into Syria, and they fight. So the money is coming from outside.
And 300,000 barrels of oil are being smuggled out every day, you know, over into Iran. You know, you see Iran's presence throughout Iraq as well.
What's the answer? What should people in the West, the United States and Europe do who are watching tonight?
Well, I think one thing, ISIS has to be stopped. I mean, obviously, are these people, it is genocide against the people. And then they also we need to find a way to send them back to their home area, the region. Without exception, every one of them said, we want to go home. We want to go back to the Nineveh Plains area. But then they said if they can't go home to a safe environment, then they need to leave. And if they leave, then there'll be no Christians there. One priest told us that he said the light of Christianity will be extinguished in Iraq after centuries of their presence there. We met some of the most radiant Christians, like Sister Diana. We interviewed some Yazidis there, and 2 18-year-old girls had been held captive by ISIS for 100 days, and then they escaped. One night, 5 girls escaped, and they were 2 of those. And we heard their stories, just horrific stories, and so we've got to do something about it.
I hear from friends of mine in the military who've come back the absolutely grisly tales of what ISIS is doing to these Christian populations, particularly women and children. I mean horrific things that I can't even recount here. Did you pick that up as well?
We did more with the Yazidis. The Yazidi, I think, it's what they've done to the women is very, very bad. Yes, all of them are suffering. There are a degree, I think, in some respects, maybe the Yazidis more, but the Christians have suffered. What can we do? Do what Pope Francis did, speak out. All religious leaders in the West ought to speak out. They ought to be condemning what's taking place. They ought to be advocating. Secondly, we can pray. God can do amazing things. We should pray. This is a spiritual battle too. And lastly, we should aid Sister Diana and the others with regard to the refugees, with regard to medicine and food and all. And lastly, we should have a Nineveh Plains and allow them to protect themselves so we can keep Christianity in the cradle where it all began.
Randel, tell me about the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. What is it? It's to raise awareness, but to do much more.
We want to fight for religious freedom for people all over the world, and we also want to help those religious minorities, particularly Christians, who are being persecuted now. And so that's why we felt like the tip of the spear is in Iraq, and we wanted to go there, see for ourselves what the situation is, and come back and awaken the church in America so that we might be involved in humanitarian assistance, but also some ongoing protection and provisions for them.
Congressman Wolf, when you retired from Congress, you really have made this your life's work. Why?
Well, my faith, I said I wanted to take the teachings of Jesus and put them into practice and speak out for those who don't have a voice.
Well, you're really continuing your work. You did this. This was really your work on the Hill as well. I mean, you established the International Religious Freedom Commission. I mean, so many legislative efforts to raise awareness about religious freedom, not only here but abroad. So I see this as continuing the trajectory started here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here.
For
more on the work of Congressman Wolf and Randel, as well as the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative, you can find them at 21wilberforce.org. Thanks again. When we return, Bishop Robert MORLINO joins us with his thoughts. Pope Francis's reform efforts are underway at the Vatican, and he'll also touch on the lobbying surrounding that upcoming Synod on the Family. Here we go again. And if you have a question about the 50 Shades of Grey film, send us an email or tweet me at RaymondArroyo.com. Does it promote sexual abuse? We'll get into all of it when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Pope Francis is meeting with the world's cardinals in Rome. They're calling it Curial Reform Week. We'll explore what he's doing, what we can anticipate, and much more with Bishop Robert C. MORLINO of Madison, Wisconsin. Welcome back to the program,
Great
Bishop.
to see you, Raymond.
Let's start with this so-called Reform Week. The Pope has created 20 new cardinals. 15 of those will be new electors. Well, let's start there. This is obviously the longest-lasting impact of what we're seeing this week, is the appointment of these new cardinals. What do these men tell us about the Pope's vision for the Church? Most of them hail from the peripheries, as the Pope likes to call them, 18 countries in all. What do you make of those appointments?
Well, I think, first of all, understanding what he means by the peripheries is not actually the easiest thing in the world. It doesn't simply mean the margins of society. It means something deeper than that, actually. Something where a part of humanity that has been ignored and neglected is now being looked to as having something of significant value to contribute in the discussion. And to say that we should go out to the peripheries is a mindset more than it is I think, a sociology program. I think that where do we go looking to evangelize? Not the comfortable places, not the places where it's easier for us to use whatever techniques we think we've learned or anything like that. But where should we go with the faith in our heart that really can transform people? And I have to say, in all honesty, that out on the peripheries, and I shouldn't even say out because that's a spatial image, but at the peripheries, there's much more openness to an honest faith sharing that comes from the heart. And that seems to be Pope Francis's goal and his style. It comes right from the heart. It's always directed to the individual or group who are sitting right in front of him. I don't get the impression that Pope Francis is speaking to the universal church very often. He seems to be focused on bringing the group or the individual who are with him closer to Jesus, period. And that's a beautiful model for evangelization, but that is a model that is almost impossible for the media to work with because they want to take every word that he says and turn it into doctrine almost immediately. And, you know, as the Pope consoles some little child about the death of her dog, they make it into a
all dogs go to heaven.
Solemn pronunciation that all dogs are going to heaven. So at that sense, in that sense, he's at the mercy of a media that, for the most part, except for great individuals like you, wants to misrepresent him and misinterpret him and give our American culture and society especially what they want. You know, they want to get the blood in the water for the sharks.
Yeah, and everybody can kind of have a good time with it. Some Vatican watchers are saying these men, these new appointments, the 15 electors being appointed, that they represent a pastoral vision of the church. These are men who are far more pastoral, and they are not tied to nor terribly interested in the theological. Would you agree with that?
I don't know them well enough to agree with that, but I would say that only, as Pope Benedict said, only what is true can ultimately be pastoral. And we cannot carry out something else and call it pastoral if it does not embody the truth. One of the problems that the media are causing with Synod reporting is that the Pope sees some difference between, well, I shouldn't put it that way, but the Pope sees a distinction between doctrine and practice such that doctrine cannot change, but the practice can.
Right.
Certain doctrines are embodied in certain practices, and even if you don't change the doctrine in writing, in a written document, if you change the practice, you have changed what the previous practice embodied.
Right, and what the doctrine is, in fact.
And so we have to be very careful about that. But it seems to me, when the Pope speaks doctrinally, intentionally, as he did in the Philippines about marriage and in his support of the Slovakian provision that would ban same-sex unions, I think he's being the true teacher of doctrine. When he gets in a room with this group of homeless people or with this group of Islamic people, everything he says is tailored to them, somehow to draw them closer to the God of truth. And we have to make a lot of distinctions with this Holy Father about who it is he's actually speaking to, what his goal actually is. I believe completely that he knows that the doctrines of the Church cannot change, and how this is going to work itself out at the Synod, I don't exactly know. But the one who does know how it will work out is the Holy Spirit. And however it works out, the Holy Spirit will use it for some good. So as always, I'm of good cheer.
Oh, I can tell. Before we get to the Synod on the Family, which I do want to get to in a moment, let's talk about this reform group that met this week, the Pope's Accountability for Clerical Sex Abuse, that commission met this week. They are recommending, demanding, that there be firm bishop accountability. Bishops who violate the norms accepted by their conference, that something be done, some penalty be extended. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think one has to be very careful because bishops govern by divine right. The will is revealed through the Pope, but God calls the bishop of a diocese to that diocese by name. The Holy Father is the instrument, but he is not the initiator of that call. That call comes from God. And that's why in the past, when it comes to disciplining bishops, it's not so easy, because how do you discipline the one whom God has put there, presumably having God's confidence? Now, there are bishops who have done very reprehensible things and who ought to be disciplined.
And who have been.
And who have been. But the important thing is, how does it happen? And it seems to me that there has to be some kind of a procedure to which the bishop has a right. And if that procedure turns out to have negative consequences for the bishop, so be it, because we have to keep the trust of the people of God. We have to let them believe that we are good and faithful shepherds, especially when it comes to taking good care of the children. And I think the best way for it to happen is through brother bishops who are friends and brother bishops in the region under the metropolitan. I think that would be the best way to have this accountability, because it could take place for the most part in a context which is not poisoned against the bishop by the media or any other factor.
I want to move on now to the Synod on the Family. There's been a lot of reporting in recent days. We see people, I don't think it's too strong a word, lobbying internationally and traveling all around, sort of plying the case. The central goal, if you will, remains the same: to extend communion to divorced and remarried Catholics without a full or fulsome process, tribunal process that would grant the annulment. So the question remains, we have Bishop Marks here in the United States just at the end of last month, and he is still pushing this Casper plan, as are a number of others. But I want to put this quote up because he goes a bit further in this interview with America Magazine. He says, "I'm astonished that most of our young people, and also Catholic homosexuals who are practicing, want a relationship that lasts forever. We must begin with the main points of the doctrine, to see the dream. The dream is to have a person say, a man and woman say, you and you forever, you and you forever. And we as church say, yes, that's absolutely okay. Your vision is right." What do you see there?
Well, if he means to say that if two people of the same sex say yes to each other forever, or if two people who are not married somehow say yes to each other forever but short of marriage, well, then I think that's wrong. I think that's just a mistake on his part. Because it's very clear from the book of Genesis and forward what the Lord intended marriage to be. Jesus clarifies it in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. Jesus says the one who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Those are Jesus' words. Now, how we can mitigate the truth of that is beyond me. I think we can develop approaches to people that encourage them to come and talk to us, rather than say there's really nothing to talk about. And I know that many, many years ago, for instance, if a Jewish person wanted to marry a Catholic person, it was not unusual for the parish priest to tell them, this, just forget it, just leave the church, you're all finished. And some even went as far as to say you're going to hell. Now, there is a way that Jewish and Catholic people can marry. They can have very beautiful, wonderful marriages. But they have to feel free from fear to come to the priest. Right. And the pastoral thing is to free the people from fear. Pastoral, the best synonym for pastoral in my world is patient. And that means we've got to know the direction we're going in, but we don't have to know it this minute. We can approach this in a way that it is revealed to you what direction we're going in such way as that you're able to accept it bit by bit by bit.
We keep hearing this argument, and Cardinal Marx made it, others have made it, even here in the United States, I've heard it repeated, that this question of Cardinal Casper's proposal, this is no change in doctrine. No one is talking about the indissolubility of marriage. That will remain as it is. We are talking merely about the discipline of the reception of the Eucharist. And you can change that without changing the doctrine.
Well, I don't think that's possible because, again, the discipline embodies the doctrine. And
it's the lived doctrine.
Someone who is living in adultery can receive communion or they cannot. And Jesus seemed to be very clear that someone who is living in adultery is not in proper relationship to him and to the church because of that, because it's a public thing. It's a public thing, and therefore those problems, however they develop, need to be solved in a public way, that is, through a tribunal. And it cannot be left in any way to be subjective, so that I would fill out a form, say, and send it to my pastor and say, I am sure that my marriage was invalid.
Right. Well, I'm also concerned about those who are left behind, the wife and children left behind as a result of this marriage. I mean, it's very nice that Daddy went and found a nice younger model who he now wants to take to church. The question is, what about Mom and the kids left at home? Shouldn't they be entitled, in justice, to a proper hearing?
Yes.
And it seems this whole formula misses that. It has no consideration for the largely women and children being left behind.
Well, it seems to me essentially confusing to say that we're going to change the discipline which embodies this doctrine, but we're not going to change the doctrine. It's almost like a mind-body split.
Yeah.
You know, the doctrine is lived out in its embodiment in the discipline. You can't, and for sure people say, well, if I can do this, that means...
They'll infer other things.
Yes.
Before we go, I got to read this to you. This is Cardinal Raymond Burke in an interview with French television. I'll put the quote up. He said, they said, but if Pope Francis insists on this path, what will you do? The path we were just discussing. He says, I will resist. I cannot do anything else. Now, later he clarified those remarks and he said, no authority can absolve me from that responsibility, my sacred duty to defend the truth of the Church's teaching and the discipline regarding marriage. And therefore, if any authority, even the highest authority, were to deny that truth or act contrary to it, I would be obliged to resist in fidelity to my responsibility before God. How do you react to that?
Who named him to be a bishop? I agree with that completely. I do not think, though, that Pope Francis will take that path, and I don't think Cardinal Burke thinks so either. That's a hypothetical.
Yeah, he said that. It's a hypothetical.
But I think he's going to certainly conserve the truth of the faith. I don't think that the Holy Spirit is going to allow the truth of the faith to be confused to that degree. Because when we're talking about marriage, we're talking about the very core of society. You know, the first of all communities. And if we get totally confused about that, even doctrinally in the official teaching of the church, then I think all is lost for society.
Okay. Well, we will check in with you certainly before the Synod, but after as well. Bishop Morlino, thank you for being here. Thank you. To keep up with Bishop Morlino's columns, you can go to madisondiocese.org. Coming up, 50 Shades of Grey is going to be huge at the box office this weekend. But what impact will it have on young women and their mothers? Dr. MEG MEEKER and MARYBETH HICKS are up next to tell us.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. The very R-rated 50 Shades of Grey opens in theaters this weekend, and it is poised to do huge business. Now, the film graphically depicts a sadomasochistic relationship between a rich, successful young man and a young, inexperienced woman. While filmmakers portray the film as a romance, some say it will popularize sexual abuse. Joining me via satellite from Grand Rapids, Michigan, are pediatrician and author Dr. MEG MEEKER and columnist and cultural commentator MARYBETH HICKS. Thank you both for being here and joining us on the program. Wish it were under happier circumstances. Why are otherwise sane, clear-thinking women drawn to this story? I mean, the 50 Shades of Grey have sold 100 million copies in the bookstores. Why? What is
worldwide?
What's the draw here, Dr. MEEKER?
You know, Raymond, I think what it is it's the storyline, and the storyline hooks women, and this is what happens. You have a young, innocent, beautiful woman who meets a man who is a billionaire. He's extremely attractive, he's suave, he has a lot of power, but he lives in the dark side, and she lives in the light side. And the storyline leads you to believe that that this young, innocent woman who could possibly win him over from the dark side to the light side, and it hooks you. And it hooks women in a romantic way. And believe it or not, in a weird way, there's a lot of hope in the movie that maybe he'll see the light. Maybe she can get through to him. Because he says he will have relationships, but he doesn't do romance and love. So the hope is that the women reading it believe is that perhaps she can teach this man to love and to have romance.
Right, that she can turn him around.
She can turn him around. Unfortunately, though, what happens is he drags her into the pit of hell, and that's inexcusable along the way.
Yeah, kind of.
But I think that's really why that's why it's so popular.
Yeah, it's the romantic ideal that's pulling women in. But the challenge here, the problem, she essentially consents. She signs a contract to allow him to objectify her, use her in all manner of ways. He beats her. He humiliates her. He binds her up. I can't discuss some of the things. I mean, I flipped through the first book, which was enough for me. I don't need to see the movie. What is the impact on people 25 and under who see this movie? Because this is really glorifying sadomasochism, let's face it.
Yeah, Raymond, you know, one of the things that was, when the book first came out, I remember, you know, it was labeled mommy porn, and it created this sort of guilty pleasure. Women I knew were reading the book. In the summer, I remember going to, you know, a sports practice for one of my kids, and the moms were in the cars reading the book. And you know, I want to preface this by saying I haven't read it, and I haven't seen the movie, and I won't see the movie. You know, I think that it's all filed under avoid the near occasion of sin. You know, but I feel like it was created in a way that became enticing to women, that you could explore your sexual self, and it was now it was a culturally not just acceptable but kind of applauded way to have this guilty pleasure. And then especially for young women, as you've said, under 25, it's created this way to try and relate to young men who in our culture have become so consumed with pornography. And so it's been a way for women, young women, to try and understand and kind of appreciate what it is that the guys are into, and in a way that I think is just, obviously we know is very degrading, but they're being so misled into believing that this is what young men want.
Right.
And so I think it's a way for them to feel educated about what young men are into.
Dr. Meeker, talk about how destructive this is. First of all, the long-term impact of pornography, which is what this is. I mean, and it's really worse than that. It's barbarity. I mean, that's what we're really talking about. But what is the impact upon the psyche of a young woman and a young man? Because this gives guys all kinds of permission slips, culturally speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And this whole idea of the dominant and the submission, and the whole idea that a woman or a man could submit to another person to beat them. And when you have violence associated with a sexual act, which we as Christians and Catholics believe is also associated with a deep, intimate love, it is very, very destructive and damaging. And I think that ultimately what it'll do with young women who will feel objectified, they will feel very confused, they will feel that the sexual act is dissociated from love and romance. And intuitively they know that's not true, but when they see that going on in the culture and they experiment with that, it doesn't, something inside of them goes, this isn't right. And honestly and truly, Raymond, I believe that that will put them at high risk for depression. And we know that depression in young people under 25 has risen dramatically over the past 10 years. So I'm very concerned about that. And I also want to say I'm very concerned about young men, because we think about objectifying women, but this is extremely objectifying for men as well, because they can be in the reverse role. But the idea of linking the violence with the sexual act is evil. It's just plain evil. I don't know how else to say it, and it's destructive to the human spirit. And I just want to appeal to all the Catholics who are listening out there that we should never be entertained with the things that grieve the heart of our God. We should never be, we should grieve with the things that grieve his heart. This movie will grieve his heart. Yeah, and there's material destruction associated with this. I mean, where this will lead young people is, I tremble thinking about it. Mary Beth, I want to share something with you. I found it remarkable on the Grammy broadcast earlier this week. There was a 50 Shades of Grey commercial, and then this public service announcement. I want your reaction.
And together we can change our culture for the better by ending violence against women and girls. Right now, nearly 1 in 5 women in America has been a victim of rape or attempted rape. And more than 1 in 4 women has experienced some form of domestic violence. It's not okay, and it has to stop. Artists have a unique power to change minds and attitudes and get us thinking and talking about what matters.
Artists have a unique power to change minds and attitudes. Am I the only person seeing the hypocrisy here? MARYBETH HICKS.
Yeah, well, first of all, he's right. Artists do have a unique power to change minds and attitudes, and unfortunately they're using it in order to normalize pornography, sexual violence, and you know, the truly misogynistic appreciation for women. And so, you know, but he's right, narrative works, and that's one of the reasons why this film and the books that it is based on are so scary. I mean, it really breaks my heart to imagine young women, the age of my daughters, going into the movies with boyfriends to go see this film, and that's going to be the thing this Valentine's weekend. This is the romance movie of the weekend, and it's going to be, it's such a twisted portrayal of what a love relationship is supposed to be that I just fear that we're now not sending hardly any good, solid, positive media images of a normal, healthy, loving relationship, and certainly not of a loving sexual relationship. We know that, you know, a few years ago, Parents Television Council did a study on the way sex and marriage was portrayed in primetime television. And sex and marriage was portrayed as boring and comical, whilst all the sex outside of marriage was steamy and sexy and interesting. And so, you know, the culture has really done a number on what it looks like to be in a normal relationship. And now this film has just taken it to a new cultural level.
There is a counter movie almost called Old Fashioned, about an old-fashioned romance, which perhaps people could protest that way. Go see that one. Dr. Meeker, isn't sadomasochism still classified as a mental disorder in the medical literature?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I haven't read the DSM lately, so I'm not really sure. Certainly, anybody walking in a reputable psychiatrist's office who is participating in this would be seen as somebody who's very disturbed. And you know, this is historic in American culture, and I think this is historic for the media culture as well, because never before have we seen pornography in an R-rated movie that is associated with this amount of violence that is shown as normal.
Right.
And when you normalize the bizarre and you normalize the evil like this, it confuses the thinking of not only adults, but our young teenagers, and they will perceive it as just another thing to do.
I want to share...
yes, I think...
Go ahead. I want to finish your thought, and then I want to share this study with you.
Well, any reputable psychiatrist would certainly see this as a sexual disorder, yes.
There was a study from Michigan State, and it showed that among women 18 to 24 who read the 50 Shades of Grey books now, just the books, they were 65% more likely to binge drink, 63% more likely to have 5 or more sexual partners, 25% more likely to have a partner who yelled or swore at them. What do you think the movie will produce among these same women, 18 to 24?
It is just terrifying. And I was so grateful that MSU did that study and you know, put those numbers out there. They can't necessarily tell whether some of these behaviors come before or after having read the book, so they can't say if it's correlative or causative, but they definitely can draw a relationship between the material in the book and what it's telling young women about how to behave. And there was some other material in there about eating disorders that are associated with readers of the books. So we just know that it's just negative self-image is completely, you know, made more positive because of the way that they read this thing and they think that the things that they're going through look attractive. And so it's really disturbing, Raymond, and it's really part and parcel of this bill of goods that's being sold to young women in this culture. And it's really younger and younger. I mean, you know, you've got Vermont teddy bears doing a 50 Shades of Grey teddy bear. You've got,
I saw that.
You know, the monogram company for sorority girls is having a 50 Shades of Monogram sale. You know, it's really everywhere, and so they can't escape it. And the message is, this is what's new and hot and sexy and what you want to be about.
Right. Dr. Meeker, I ran into some people today here in D.C., and they're taking their husbands to this movie. They thought, oh, it's going to be fun. Another person I ran into said, what's the big deal? This is a consensual adult relationship depicted in the movie. Is consenting enough for this sort of behavior?
You know, here's the thing. I am not in a position to tell adult people what they should and shouldn't do, and, you know, I don't have the right to do that. I will tell you, however, that if you show this kind of thing to a person under 25 where their mind is still developing and their identity is still developing, it's going to have a profoundly destructive effect on them. Because as far as having sadomasochistic sex with a child or anybody under 20 or 18 who really doesn't have the full cognitive capacity to make decisions like an adult would, I don't consider that consensual. I think they're still very confused. So, you know, if adults want to do it, I'm not going to tell them not to do it. Personally, I think that it's going to be very, very harmful for their relationship. I would never sit there and watch that with my husband. It's just way too... It's just dark. I don't know what else to say, but certainly the effect on kids unmistakably is going to be very negative in the future, and we will see that. We will see that over the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I just find it puzzling at a time when we're seeing people saying, you know, this is a moment of female empowerment and girl power, and then we have this narrative, the most popular female narrative in the country, that is a handsome guy, well wealthy guy who's essentially a manipulative stalker, a predator who objectifies this woman, literally beats her for his own sexual gratification, I guess.
Right. Exactly. Very disturbed. Very disturbed.
Why are people embracing this, though? This is what I find so bizarre. Why are women?
I know. I have the answer, Raymond. It's the devil. Satan always makes things that are evil look attractive, seem interesting, seem enticing. That's the whole point. And you know, we've seen over the course of a generation now how pervasive the evil power of pornography has been, predominantly on men, but now on women as well. And now we can see what's happening is to bring women along toward that path, you have to make it seem appealing to women. And what would make pornography and violent sex and submission and degraded situations appeal to women? Make them seem romantic. That would be the whole point. So Satan is not stupid. He never has been. And we know that this is why it's attractive, because evil is made attractive by Satan in order to make it work, in order to ensnare people.
And the idea that this is empowering to women is so hypocritical and ironic, because it enslaves women. It literally ties women up and binds them up, and that's what you see in Anastasia Steele, who's the object of Christian Gray's whatever. I can't say love or romance or whatever, whatever she's the object of. So she literally is bound up. So this is in no way empowering to women. If anything, it enslaves them.
Final quick mention here. A lot of Catholic bishops are coming out against the film. Laverty in Arlington, Bishop Schnurr in Cincinnati. They've called it a direct assault on Christian marriage, humiliating to the dignity of women. How should women particularly engage this issue with their friends? Very briefly, ladies, I'll give you each a quick chance. Seconds.
Yeah, I would encourage most women to, all women to do what I did, which was to really, you know, when I had friends who were reading the book, I didn't shy away. I didn't want to be politically correct. I just literally said, that is garbage and I can't believe you're reading it. And, you know, call me judgy. It was what it was. But,
Meg?
you know, really, I think at this point, if you can't speak out.
Yeah. I try to engage women and talk. I understand why they think it's so attractive, because I think it's laced with enough hope that this woman can bring this disturbed man over to the light side. But I say, but that's not enough to allow yourself to be exposed to this trash. Really.
Thank you both
and
very
for
much.
A mother to allow her.
I'm all out of time. I could go another hour with you both, but thank you both. MARYBETH HICKS, Dr. MEG MEEKER. Thanks for being here, and you know, hopefully some people have listened and will listen to your wise words. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. I also have the announcement of my new Will Wilder middle grade book series there. Be sure to tune in next week for my exclusive interview with potential GOP candidate for president Rick Santorum and his wife Karen. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now.